In December of 1869, the U.S. territory of Wyoming passed a law that was among the first of its kind in the world, full women's suffrage. At the time, many places only allowed property-owning, literate women to vote. Others had full suffrage but then took it away. Therefore, Wyoming granted the longest-standing full women's suffrage law in the world. You can tell she's really proud of this because of the motto slapped right on her state seal, equal rights. Shortly after, Wyoming's neighbor Utah also gave women the right to vote. However, she had her next election first, so Utah women were the first in the United States to vote under equal suffrage. We even know who the first one to vote was, Seraph Young. This historic achievement influenced suffrage movements across the United States over the next 50 years and was integral in advancing women's causes. Young should be remembered as a strong figure of women's rights like Susan B. Anthony or Rosie the Riveter, but you would struggle to find anyone who has heard her name. Seraph Young did not match what comes to mind when people thought of a suffragette, an authority-defying radical. She never ran for political office or any civic leadership. Instead, she spent her time as a devoted schoolteacher who prioritized being a homemaker and taking care of her disabled husband. But worst of all, she was also a polygamous Mormon. At the time, Mormons were a hated religious minority in the American body politic, in part due to their practice of polygamy. The public viewed polygamy to be a moral abomination, saw Mormon women as helpless victims, and considered them to be un-American. Thus, the United States did everything it could to keep the Mormons down, by stripping Utah of her land, her rights, and subjecting her to military occupation. The church attempted to change their public image by giving women voting rights. Unexpectedly, some congressmen also supported the idea, believing that women would vote to end polygamy. This agreement meant women's suffrage in Utah had local and federal support, which suffragettes did not enjoy anywhere else. Wyoming had only 1,900 women in her borders, compared to Utah's 42,000. This was the largest voting bloc of women in the country, giving Utah women recognition and influence in suffrage movements nationwide. They played essential roles in suffrage protests and generated the most signatures from any state in petitions to the government for a full women's suffrage law. However, they still defended the religious practice of polygamy, which many suffragettes criticized for damaging the movement. It soon became apparent that Utah women were not going to abandon the practice, which angered the government. Keep in mind that at this time, Utah was a territory, not a state, meaning the federal government had greater control over her affairs and control over the Mormons. Utah did petition to become a state 6 times, which the government rejected to maintain this control. In a symbolic screw you to the church, the government revoked women's voting rights in the Edmunds-Tucker Act, the first and only time this ever occurred in U.S. history. This act was among many anti-Mormon laws that the government passed over the decades. Defeated, the church abandoned the practice of polygamy only a few months later, which finally allowed them to become a state in 1896. Full women's suffrage was written into the Utah Constitution, making her the only state to give women the right to vote not once, but twice. 14 Utah women were elected to office that same year, including the first ever woman state legislator in American history, Martha Hughes Cannon. Utah women went onto the national stage to promote voting rights. Their remarkable effort paved the way for the 19th Amendment in 1920, establishing women's suffrage throughout the country, just in time for the 50th anniversary of Seraph Young's landmark achievement.